Hey, this is Sam Black with my second match with this Bant Vintage Cube deck. I've lost the roll, and so my opponent will be on the play. And I have a hand that is pretty good. I can play an Arbor Elf, and then on the second turn play presumably Trigon Predator, but optionally Reflector Mage. Trigon Predator early can be really good, and then if I find an island, I'll have Mystic Snake up. So keep this, and play Arbor Elf, which my opponent Force Spikes. I could have played around Force Spike by playing Forest, then Mox Diamond, discarding Plains, then Arbor Elf, but it didn't occur to me. So, also, it's not that big a deal. The Force Spike's probably going to get something at some point, and it's fine. So, that gets countered, and I don't have any reason to play the Mox Diamond. My opponent plays Young Pyromancer, and I don't have a third mana now because I have to discard the Plains to play the Mox Diamond, and I don't want to play the Plains because I need a lot of blue mana, so I would like to get the Mox Diamond down so that I can potentially cast Cryptic Command someday, so I'm planning to discard Plains to Mox Diamond, but I don't think there's much of a reason to do it now. So I'm just going to do nothing this turn. And my opponent attacks with Pyromancer, and luckily my opponent also does nothing. And now I draw Sapphire, so I can play both Moxes and then cast stuff. So I'm just going to play the Trigon Predator. And my opponent still doesn't do anything, so I'm just going to attack and play Sword. And my opponent fails to draw a land again, and now I can equip the Sword. My opponent still doesn't have an answer, so it's very difficult to lose against a blue-red deck when I have Sword of Fire Ice equipped and my opponent's stuck on 2 lands. And then I'm just going to play Mother of Runes, and my opponent concedes to presumably still not being able to play a spell that turn, or at least not one that stops this from being something that they can't ever really deal with. So, not a very interesting game. I drew out of my 2-land situation before my opponent did. So, I'm on the draw for the second game, and this hand is extremely reliant on Ponder, and I don't think that it is good, so I foolishly kept it anyway, apparently. I guess I'm on the draw, and I'm optimistic about Ponder, and I have Signet to get me up to being able to cast Cryptic Command. Voice Resurgence is potentially good in this matchup, but a little questionable when I'm on Island. I guess Simic Signet gets me there. I kind of think I should have mulliganed this, but I sort of get keeping it. Anyway, I get extremely lucky and draw Mox Diamond, which makes my mana situation a lot better, even though it doesn't give me 2 mana this turn. It does mean that I can Ponder and still have a land that can cast Voice Resurgence, essentially, in play. So I play Mox Diamond, also kind of baiting Force Spike here, where my opponent could Force Spike it, and then that's fine, and it's countered, and I just play the island. Discard island, Ponder to try to find a land, and find a land, so I'm not going to be picky, definitely keep this. So draw the Plains and play it, and my opponent just plays a second land, so now I'm going to play Voice of Resurgence, because I think getting Voice Resurgence into play against blue-red is really good. Now my opponent makes what I consider to be an extremely questionable play and incinerates the Voice Resurgence on my turn, giving me an extra token. I suspect that that's just due to not having played against Voice Resurgence recently enough, and presumably just forgetting that this would happen. and plays a Maze of Ith and doesn't spend mana on anything here. So unless they have a counterspell, they definitely should have waited on the Incinerate. But if they have a counterspell, it would have had to have been one that they drew on their turn, because they didn't counter the Voice Resurgence. And the fact that they played the Incinerate on my turn doesn't in any way point to them having a counterspell now, even though that's what would kind of make all this make sense, except that I know they didn't have one on the previous turn, because I really don't think that they would allow Voice Resurgence to resolve and then Incinerate it to save a counterspell. So I'm going to run out the Stoneforge Mystic before combat to make these things 3/3s so that I get to push an extra damage. And get Sword of Fire and Ice, which isn't great against Maze of Ith. I could have just played Signet here, but I just wanted to get these things bigger. And one of them gets sent back, the other connects, and my opponent plays a sword, which doesn't really do very much without any creatures. And I play Thada, which can obviously get mazed, but it's growing these elementals, and my opponent can't maze everything. Obviously play it before combat to increase my power. Opponent mazes 1 and takes 5. Opponent has no follow-up play. Opponent really did not draw well. I play a creature before combat again to pump these things, and I play the Finhorn Elf to spend as little mana as possible to threaten doing something with Thada, which potentially pays off because my opponent does Maze of Ith the Thada. And I put my opponent down to 1 here, and then play the Signet, and that's game. So, mostly just a match where my opponent got pretty unlucky, but that happens sometimes. Also, is potentially a strength of drafting a more aggressive deck that you give your opponent less time to get out of it, but that is also debatably sometimes overstated, because with a control deck, when your opponent stumbles on lands, you just get further ahead, get to the point where you've drawn more cards, have more counterspells up, can cast larger threats, so it's kind of a wash. But anyway, just something that happens.